This is Cybersound, your simplified and fundamentals-focused source for all things cybersecurity.
Welcome to Cybersound. I'm your host, Jason Pufall, joined today by Steve Maresca, Mike Grandy. Hey, guys.
Hey, how you doing?
And we have joined via Zoom today, Patrick Pearson, Vice President of Open Banking Partnerships at Mastercard. Welcome, Patrick.
Thanks, guys. Great to be here.
Yeah, and this is, I think, an exciting podcast for us, right? Because obviously, Mastercard is so focused on protecting consumers and businesses from fraud. Obviously, we spend a lot of time, clearly in the security space relative to identity protection and to data protection overall. So I think this will be an interesting conversation around that.
For sure. I've had the pleasure of knowing Patrick for a very long time, and I'm just so happy to have him join us today to talk about his background, experience, and some of the initiatives that MasterCard's taken on. But maybe to kick off, Pat, you want to just give us a little review of your bio and where you came from and what you're working on today?
Absolutely, Mike. Thanks. It is great to be here in a different setting with you guys. So I've been in the financial services and financial technology space for the past 14 years. For the last 7, I've spent at Mastercard in a number of roles. I now lead our partnerships team, as was mentioned at the top, focused on proliferating distribution of Mastercard open banking technology, which I'm sure we'll get into over the course of the conversation. But prior to that, spent 7 years in the financial services space in higher education, ultimately providing all the technology that helps move money on and off campus through the business offices of colleges and universities.
So, we spend a lot of time in many of those arenas, especially higher ed, where a great number of our clients are based. Also, municipal work, state and local governments, and small business as well. Maybe talk us through where Mastercard is looking ahead and some of the things that they see as initiatives for 2024 and beyond in that space.
Sure. So I'll kind of start from an outside-in view, and we can zoom into the particulars. I think at the core, we look at ourselves from a network perspective as stewards of data. Our job is to connect two sides of a transaction and to process sensitive data between those parties to make sure that the people trying to transact on our network are who they say they are. And so that merchants can, whoever's accepting those payments can have a high level of confidence that those payments are legitimate. So that's what we've done on the core network from Mastercard for the last 50 years. And in contrary to a lot of people's beliefs, and certainly I still correct my family members after seven Christmas and Thanksgiving dinners that we're not a credit card issuer. So you don't have a credit card directly with Mastercard. We work with banks who ultimately issue our cards. So we operate a franchise, and our job as a franchise is to make sure that data is processed securely on that network, and that we bring additional capabilities to help ultimately resolve identities, ensure availability of funds so that people can transact instantly on our network. What we're focused on now, kind of from a looking ahead perspective, is we got into a space called open banking. A lot of people listening to this may not have any idea what we mean by open banking, but I can guarantee you that most people have used open banking. They just don't know it by that name. Ultimately, we enable people to connect their bank accounts to more easily transact amongst some other use cases. And so again, same principles. People need to transact out of their bank account, send money to a third party or receive money from a third party. And we're using technology to be able to make sure that the people transacting on each side, and most importantly, the person who is wanting to get money in or out of that account, is the actual rightful owner of that account. And we can get into the particulars about how we're enabling that.
Yeah, so thanks, Pat. I'm curious because we deal with a lot of fraud investigations regarding disbursements that went to parties that should not have received them, attempts to collect money redirected elsewhere. How does that intersect with open banking and the validation that you're referring to?
And actually, before you answer, though, can you give a couple of examples of maybe consumer-facing applications that you would consider open banking, so to help ground that for people?
Yeah.
Sure. Right. I'll use a really simple account opening use case. So I'm willing to bet that most people listening to this have a Venmo account. So Venmo is a stored value wallet, right? And when you open a Venmo account, there's not just money sitting in that Venmo account, unfortunately, when you open it, right? So you open a Venmo account. Venmo then prompts you to say, hey, Pat, before you can actually transact with your Venmo account, you need to put money into that account from an external bank account you have elsewhere. And What then happens is Venmo will say, hey, 10 years ago without open banking, it would have been, hey, Pat, can you please manually type in the name of the bank where your account sits, the routing and account number, which none of us ever have on hand. I don't even own a checkbook. And then there would be a validation that would happen over the course of time. Hey, Pat, we're going to drop a couple of transactions under $1 into that account. Remember to come back here 3 days later to see if those transactions went in, right? And what they're doing in that's called micro deposit verification. What they're doing is assuming that if you're able to go see that those transactions posted to the account successfully, that you must have been able to log into that account. So you must have known, had the right credentials. You gave us the right routing and account number. You didn't fat finger it in, right? And that's a very old school way. What open banking is, hey, Pat, we need to fund this account. Mastercard to validate all of the information that I just described before, routing and account number, that you own the account. All you have to do is log into your bank account. So up pops our widget, and it says, hey, identify the bank. So I click on the Chase logo. I log into my Chase account. I connect I select my savings account or my checking account, and then I'm done. And then our system will actually go to Chase, retrieve the routing and account number. We'll retrieve the name and address on file with Chase for that bank account, and we send that to the receiving party, and then they can verify probably some data they have from you guys to say, do we actually believe these two people to be the same? And there's some other biometrics we can talk about that we're doing as well. But from a most basic perspective, that's hopefully a pretty digestible example.
Yeah, and you certainly dated everybody here because we all understand, when people gave you 1 penny and took away 1 penny
Exactly.
and asked you to validate, right?
It's still very prominent today, unfortunately.
Oh, yeah?
So.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I would disagree slightly in that I think my nieces and nephews would think that Venmo accounts are automatically opened up with deposits ready to go, ready to spend, and magically they're refilled. But sorry, you were saying.
Yeah, so I mean, ultimately, you're using the validation that the originating banks did in person, or however the account was established as a means of establishing that chain of data. Is that effectively one way of interpreting it?
Yeah, I would think so. I would just say that it's usually not the originating company. So if you think about it, these ACH transactions are usually a pull. So I give you my information. Sure. Your bank then sends a request to my bank to pull the funds out of my account. And so yeah, it's validating the originator of the transaction, but it's it's not the person who's sending the money in your case. It's the person who's receiving it. Yep.
And in one of the areas that I'm sure is a you're on a knife's edge is building more security into the product sets and more assurance, but at the same time making the user experience enjoyable, quick, and efficient. And sometimes those two areas sort of work against each other. So maybe you could talk about some of the initiatives and some of the things that you and your team are looking at in that area.
Yeah, absolutely. You're right, Mike. There needs to be some kind of natural tension, right? You want to make it as easy as possible for the person to open and fund their, online account, but you need to take the necessary steps to make sure that there's not fraud happening. And in these spaces, account opening fraud and account takeover has become very, very prevalent because of the lack of data, real-time data available to the entities that are transacting. So some of the things we're doing, it's one thing for us to tell Venmo team, hey, the bank said, Chase says that it's Patrick Pearson at 123 Main Street that owns the account. We just passed that data through. That's kind of moderately helpful. But what we're also able to do now is we can tell them as well, hey, here's the IP address of the device that this person's using to connect this bank account. Have we ever seen this IP address match this name and address before? Have we seen that name and address match at all before? If so, how prominently? If we've seen pings we have a proprietary database through a separate asset that we have at Mastercard that looks at all that combined with the biometrics we see on the phone. So you take all of this information in real time, you can really figure out, does the IP address make sense? Like, is the IP address in Connecticut where Pat lives, according to the address we got from the bank? Or is the IP address in, Vietnam because it's part of a server farm for
right.
account takeover where they're just, stuffing credentials into third-party apps.
So, on the balance, is the fraud that you're trying to reduce and detect earlier, more dominant at account funding after the account has been established? What sort of timeline is more typical for criminal intervention with legitimate accounts?
Yeah, all of the above for sure. To varying degrees. Account takeover fraud has been around for a while. The old school way is, hey, you dropped your debit card at the gas station, somebody picks it up and starts, emptying your bank account on the debit card. E-commerce, it's become even easier because, like me, I'm sure you guys get notifications every couple of weeks that your username or your password or the combination has shown up in some data leak on the dark, and it's available on the dark web. So those credentials are being used and by third parties who have tens of thousands of combinations of username and passwords. You guys know this, right? I don't preach on the choir. So, that stuff is happening all day long. We're the new one, and they always stay ahead, right? They're always one step ahead, as you guys know, right? And so account takeover has been there for a while. Account opening fraud has become very, very prevalent, especially when, if you think about it, you open up a new checking account. Sometimes there's, a $200 bonus that you get as soon as you open the account. So, these fraudsters are opening accounts. They're connecting some kind of legitimate third-party bank account, and they're getting the reward, transferring the money out, and, see you later. And then they close the account. So it's all over the place, but that latter part is what we're trying to help, especially financial institutions guard against today.
So as fast as the marketing gurus are coming up with new ways to increase sales and increase activity and new client acquisition, the fraudsters and bad actors are figuring out ways to abscond with those gains.
Yeah, no, they're not. Very literally, there is a direct correlation when you watch the Super Bowl and there's ads for new. Remember when a couple Super Bowls ago where every other commercial was crypto?
Yeah.
There was a direct correlation between the spike in accounts opened and fraud that happened in those institutions directly was tied to the ads in the Super Bowl in the 24 hours thereafter.
So I know you have a background in higher ed. We've got a whole variety of sort of government and state, local companies that we work with. Are there any industries that you think are more prone to fraud or have a greater risk for sort of some of the activities that you talked about? Like I think about just the transactional volume within higher ed, and my instinct would be that that's a high risk area. But I'm curious your thoughts.
It absolutely is. So from a risk perspective within higher ed, a lot of the risks that's associated with money movement is disbursements. Not a lot of people trying to take somebody's checking account over to pay, a $40,000 tuition bill, right? They're more wanting to fraudulently receive excess funds, or somebody drops out of a class and deserves a refund for the course fee. So that is where a lot of the fraud tends to happen in higher ed from our experience. And a lot of that, and whether it's higher ed or municipalities or utilities or whatever, I think it's a lot about the adoption curve, and it's reliant on all of us to bring the same level of sophistication to those constituents and partners and clients that big tech firms and big banks have availed themselves to for a number of years.
So there's an interesting intersection here, because we've spoken with other organizations that help detect application fraud.
Right. Well, that was Maurice just
absolutely.
a couple of months ago.
This is precisely what you're talking about, where it's not a real person they're claiming to be, or they're rinsing and reusing an identity, joining a course, and then with illegitimate funds to begin with, using the school as a mule and redirecting it elsewhere. So very interesting kind of a scenario you're talking about. It's the other end of that equation.
Right. And it also shows, because I think Maurice brought up, there are four-year institutions that are actually less prone to that risk than community colleges, which have that open enrollment, sort of continual enrollment, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, sorry. I had sort of a two-parter, but the first part would be, sort of looking forward, new year, objectives in 24 and beyond. You've talked about some of the strategies and some of the ways that, you and Mastercard are approaching the market. What do you see out there? I don't want to say what keeps you up at night, but what are the areas that when you're talking to your clients and your partners, that is sort of really top of mind and really the areas that they really want focused on moving forward?
Yeah, well, Mike, my kids keep me up at night. But outside,
Ditto.
no, yeah, exactly. So no, but to your question, I think one of the things that our clients and partners struggle with, and again, I'm talking to technology providers who are serving, municipalities and government. So I'm one step removed from you guys. But at the end of the day, I think there's so much talk about fraud that it's like a prioritization exercise. I'm getting inundated by all these new capabilities. Pat's telling me that, he can validate all this sensitive information in real time. And, meanwhile, we barely have, a bank has a separate login for online banking versus mobile banking. That is a real thing that tens of thousands of banks struggle. So it's like, how do you even begin to prioritize where to start? And is it more of like a thumb in the, in the huge gaping hole in the dam, or is it, I can be proactive. So I think it's a prioritization struggle. They all know, everyone's aware that there's fraud happening. It's, how precise can I be, and how much effort does it take to do that? And how do I prioritize it against a number of other priorities that have nothing to do with fraud, but there's some kind of technological component, which is obviously, where you guys can come and help.
Back to our security fundamentals, leading the way.
I think there are some other, trends underway. The FTC has lowered its reporting thresholds for certain types of disclosures and security incidents. I think that's helpful. It's, shedding more light on those situations where organizations need to defend the data more appropriately. It's the other end of the equation, I suppose.
Maybe, putting a bow on some of this, your area, partnerships are built on trust, and trust, with trust comes, what are you doing with my data? What are you doing with my information? So I think you've got, quite a heavy lift of responsibility to your partners and your clients. But, really appreciate you joining us today for sure.
Yeah, absolutely, Mike.
Any closing thoughts? Anything that we haven't covered that you're hoping that we might ask?
Yeah.
Let's see. I think just, it wasn't a question but the statement Mike just made, I think the term partners and partnership has become co-opted a bit by the entire sales world. I think there is a big difference between a vendor and a partner. A vendor is transactional. They just make the sale, they'll talk to you again when your contract renews in whatever, 3-5 years. And I think for us, and I'm sure the same for you guys, and I know from having talked to Michael over a number of years as the business has grown, having someone who can come in and really understand your business as well as you do is the only way a partnership really evolves, because there is a two-sided trust to know that, you're only suggesting to me the things I need. You're not trying to sell me stuff I don't need. As cliche as that all may sound, I think in this day and age now, that having a partner who you truly, truly trust. And again, I'm sure you can look across, your book of business too. And there's just clients you have that, there's just like this two-way intrinsic trust, and they're helping you be smarter at your business and vice versa. So I think I spend a lot of my day trying to understand how we can be better in our business. And a lot of that comes from external feedback we get from clients or prospects.
Yeah. I think that's very true.
Yeah.
Information security is the trust business.
That's right.
That's our job.
I think that's the spot to end there, right?
Absolutely.
Partnership and trust.
That's it.
So
well put.
Yeah, Patrick, thanks for joining today. I really appreciate your perspective, especially coming from that financial side of the practice, right? We tend to do a lot in other ways, and probably not quite as much in the day-to-day transactional financial space. So I appreciate your perspective there and joining us.
Yeah, absolutely, guys. It was really fun. I appreciate the conversation.
Great.
Likewise.
All right. And
Thanks
if anybody ever has any questions about sort of cardholder data security, or anything you want to continue, of course, feel free to reach out to us. We can engage Patrick again and continue the conversation. So thanks for listening as always.
We'd love to hear your feedback. Feel free to get in touch at Vancord on LinkedIn. And remember, stay vigilant, stay resilient. This has been Cybersound.